this stretch of road is pitch black on this cloudy, moonless night. One police officer would later refer to this exact spot as the loneliest place on Earth.
It's Tuesday, and you're listening to Murder Unscripted.
My name's Ed, and for the past 2 decades, I've been producing true crime content for some of your favorite networks like Hulu, Oxygen, and of course, Investigation Discovery.
And I'm Melissa, Ed's bestie and walking, talking true crime database.
We've combined my behind-the-scenes insight with Melissa's morbid curiosity to bring you a podcast that immerses you in the true crime genre like never before.
We highlight victims' cases and bring you exclusive insight from the people who lived through them, with a touch of humor to lighten even the darkest stories.
This is Murder Unscripted.
Dun dun dun!
What is happening, crime crew? Welcome to episode 96 of Murder Unscripted, the internet's most authentic true crime podcast and just one of the many amazing shows on the Darkcast network, who only spotlight the best in indie podcasting. I'm your host, Ed Hydock, here with my bestie, Melissa Spivey. Good morning, my friend.
Good morning. It is very early.
It is. This is not like us. We're evening recorders. If this is your first time listening to Murder Unscripted or your 96th time, welcome. We are so glad you're here, and we hope you enjoy the content that we're bringing you. And if you do like us, please consider leaving a review, especially on Apple. And if you really like us, like teetering on love, please consider joining our Patreon, because not only do you get some exclusive stories and amazing perks, but 20% of your membership goes directly to the Courthouse Dogs Foundation. And they are our friends in the Pacific Northwest who train facility dogs to help victims of trauma when they need it most.
Yeah, Patreon's fun, and you'll find out the connection between Ed's dating life and SeaWorld. But
it's true.
On Patreon, there are a few tiers, but basically, for $5 a month, you'll get ad-free episodes, and we've been trying to release the episodes up to 2 days early on Patreon. And also in the $5 tier, you get a mini-sode, which we say is about 25 to 30 minutes, but it ends up being like a regular length episode because we all know brevity is not my strong point.
No.
And then in the $10 tier, you get all of that fun stuff and another regular length episode.
That's a fact. All right, Melissa, well, I don't think we have anything else except that we are in week 4 of our spring cleaning block, which is all about cleaning out our inboxes and sifting through the cases that you all have suggested that we cover.
Yes, and today we will be sharing a very, very special episode. This case was suggested by one of our favorite MU fans, Cassandra.
Yes.
Cassandra is an OG supporter of Murder Unscripted and has become such a good friend of the pod.
She absolutely has, and I want to give you guys a little insight into why we're doing this story. So, from the day that we met Cassandra, she had told us about a great aunt who was murdered back in the 60s, and the case is still unsolved today, if you can believe that. And you know, we don't make a habit of covering cases that aren't fully adjudicated here because they get messy. There's no official legal resolution, so there's a lot of speculation, a lot of finger pointing, but no actual conviction. And that being said, this is a case that deserves answers as much as any that we have ever covered. And while we are not in a capacity to answer those questions, we are in a position to bring attention to the case in hopes that someone may come out of the woodwork with information that police need to solve this case. And not to mention, Cassandra and her mom, Lisa, are 2 of the kindest, sweetest, nicest people you will ever want to meet.
True.
Yeah, and Lisa was kind enough to give us some additional insight over the phone about this case. So as we go through the story, you're going to hear some sound bites from that conversation kind of sprinkled in to really illustrate the family's feelings on this case and who was responsible for the atrocious crime that we're going to talk about. And the last thing I want to mention before we dive in is that Melissa and I became so immersed in this case that it won't be told in our usual single host format. So we're actually both going to walk you through various parts of the story to really show you the cohesiveness that we exhibited in researching this case. And, we really shared this one. Yeah. And sorry, not sorry, but this is going to be a long one because we are treating this like we have an audience of 2. There are 2 people that we really want to make sure we do Irene's story justice. Like, she absolutely deserves this. So Lisa and Cassandra, we love you guys, and this one is for you.
Yes, we absolutely do. All right, well, our story is going to begin in June of 1968 in Cleveland, Ohio, of all places. And 25-year-old Irene Izak was scared. There was a shadowy figure approaching her, and she tried to run, but it felt like her legs were stuck in place. They were just heavy and useless. It was almost like the ground itself was holding her captive. And as this unknown figure gets closer, Irene tried to see his face, but it was obscured. It was a blur where features should be. It was kind of like staring through water. Irene opened her mouth to scream, but absolutely no sound came out. And this dark, scary figure was upon her now. She could feel his presence. It was cold and menacing. And then she saw it, something in his hand, a rock, heavy and jagged. The first blow came without warning. Searing pain exploded through her skull. She tried to raise her arms to protect herself, but they wouldn't move. Another blow, and another. The rocks kept coming, crashing down on her head again and again. Finally, she found her voice. Irene jolted awake, screaming. Her hands flew to her head, feeling for wounds that weren't there. Suddenly, her aunt and uncle rushed into their guest room in Cleveland, finding their beautiful and beloved niece trembling, tears streaming down her face. "Somebody was hitting me on the head," she cried. "It's just a dream," they told her, "just a terrible dream." But only 2 nights later, on June 10th, 1968, Irene Izak's nightmare would become her reality. Her body was found in a ravine on Wellesley Island, New York, killed exactly as she had dreamed just a few nights prior, bludgeoned with rocks, her head savagely beaten. Now, while Irene's dream left her feeling uneasy, there was nothing, and I truly mean nothing, that was going to stand in her way of leaving Cleveland and getting to Quebec City for a new career path. Just a day or so later, on the afternoon of June 9th, 1968, Irene hugged her aunt, uncle, and cousins and got in her 1965 tan VW Beetle to go in pursuit of her dreams. Sadly, this would be the last time her family would see Irene alive. So we need to rewind, and we need to talk about the woman that this whole case is about, Irene Juliana Izak. And yes, she is a murder victim, but she is so much more than that. This woman lived like 5 lives, all before the age of 25.
That's a fact.
All right, well, I want to start by telling you that the information we're presenting you today is based on several sources, historical newspaper archives from both PA and New York, police reports that took some work to obtain, as well as a book entitled The North Country Murder of Irene Izak, Stained by Her Blood, written by David Champine. Irene Juliana Izak was born in the summer of 1942 in the small village of Balatnia in western Ukraine. This area was described by Irene's father in a letter as, quote, "a picturesque small community surrounded by mountains on 3 sides as if they wanted to guard it against an enemy attack which was creeping from the east," end quote. This reminded me immediately of, are you familiar with the Starry Night painting by Vincent van Gogh?
Of course. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, when you look at this painting, you first see like this pretty night sky and this peaceful, serene looking town. It looks safe. It looks quiet. But when you look closer at this painting, it seems like there's danger all around. And that's kind of what was happening at the time of our story. In the middle of the chaos of World War II, Irene Juliana Izak was born into a world on fire.
Who knew you were such an art historian? Man.
I took a lot of art classes, so,
Wow. I'm impressed. It's a cool observation.
Thank you. Her father, Reverend Bohdan Izak, was a Byzantine Catholic priest.
Yeah, so I grew up Catholic, and I think it's important to explain the difference here. So Byzantine Catholic Church is basically, it's a type of Catholic Church that is united with the Pope every step of the way. So it's a sect that believes that, like, the same core things about Jesus, meaning the sacraments, the salvation, etc. However, there are some key differences, and the biggest difference being the style and the culture. But again, not the core values. So for example, it uses the older Byzantine way of worship and prayer, like more icons, chanting, incense, that kind of thing, instead of the Roman style, which you see at a typical Roman Catholic mass. And the other big difference is that Byzantine priests can be married if it's prior to them being ordained. And that's a big thing to mention here.
Yeah, that is big. A decade before Irene's birth, her parents, Bohdan Izak and Maria Kowalski, they were married in 1932, just a few months before Bohdan was officially ordained as a priest. So that's, like Ed said, why he was able to get married and have a family.
Yes.
And I'm not sure if Bohdan and Maria if they planned to have a big family, but ultimately, Irene would be one of 6 children.
Wow.
She was number 5 in the group. She had 2 older brothers, Andrei and Zenon, and 2 older sisters, Lubo and Alina. And the younger brother, Nicholas, who was born after Irene, he was actually born on U.S. soil, so we'll get back to that shortly. The book we referenced earlier, The North Country Murder of Irene Izak, doesn't start with the murder that would later become news headlines. This book, it is about the crime, but it's not. It's also about survival. It's about a courageous, beautiful, and incredibly strong family caught between 2 brutal systems of power. And Irene's parents, Reverend Bowden and Maria, were just trying to protect their faith, their kids, and of course each other. So in the time period we're discussing, when Irene Juliana Izak was born on July 22nd, 1942, Ukraine wasn't its own country. It was kind of stuck in this violent tug of war between 2 massive powers, which were the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. And because I am embarrassingly ignorant of world history, especially around the time frame of the coming information we're going to share with you, Ed is going to walk us through most of the next part.
Yes, and I'm not exactly some kind of world-renowned historian, but I've watched plenty of History Channel specials, so I do have a little more well-versed in some of this stuff. But that being said, please feel free to correct me if some of this information is wrong. So this all began when the Soviets took control in 1939. And then the Bolsheviks, who were basically the Communist Revolutionary Party of the Soviets, they took over and they really cracked down on, especially religious leaders. Churches were targeted, priests were persecuted, and they were even deporting people to Siberia. It was nuts.
And this is why Irene's dad, Father Bowden Izak, who, as I mentioned, was a Ukrainian Greek Catholic priest or a Byzantine Catholic priest, he was directly in danger, and at one point he actually had to flee and hide out to avoid Soviet retaliation.
That's absolutely true. So then in 1941, the Nazis, they invaded and they pushed the Soviets out. And some Ukrainians originally thought that, okay, maybe this will be better, but spoiler alert, it was not.
It certainly was not.
No, the Germans obviously brought their own terror, things like stealing food and livestock and forcing labor, as well as brutal violence against the civilians. And it's important to note that during all this time, the Izaks were still living in the Ukraine, which makes this next part pretty damn remarkable. Mm-hmm. So during this time, the Izaks were secretly hiding Jewish people in their barn, and they would only go out under the cover of darkness to bring them food and kind of make sure they're okay. And Father Izak even baptized some of the Jews in an attempt to protect them. And any history buff out there know that the Nazis, if they had discovered this, the entire family would have been executed. I think that's not in question.
Mm-hmm.
So by 1943-44, the war shifted again, and the German front was starting to collapse, and the Soviets were coming back, which meant villages were bombed, buildings were being burned, and civilians were kind of stuck in between. And I'm not even kidding when I say these bombs were dropping feet from where Irene and her family had lived.
God, that is so scary.
No, right? Well, obviously, Bowden and Marie knew that they could not keep their children safe here, and frankly, they weren't exactly safe themselves. Because for a priest who had already fled Soviet persecution once, the return of the Bolsheviks meant serious danger. So in 1944, the Izak family made the impossible decision to flee west. They bartered what little they had for transportation. I mean, they traveled by wagon, and overcrowded cargo trains was the survival stuff. I can't even begin. I get on the highway and it's the slightest inconvenience and it ruins my day.
It's so true.
Well, at one point they rode for 9 days and 9 nights on open rail cars, and they moved through Slovakia and Hungary before eventually reaching Vienna, Austria, all while facing the bombing raids, hunger, exhaustion, and more importantly, constant fear. Now, one would hope that this was the end of the Izaks family troubles, but unfortunately it was not. So they couldn't go back to Soviet-controlled Ukraine, especially not Father Bowden, but they also didn't have a permanent home yet. And there was another issue. So Father Bowden was Ukrainian Greek, and that meant that he was married. And Austria was overwhelmingly Roman Catholic, where priests were celibate. So he didn't exactly quote unquote fit with the local church structure. And he wasn't rejected outright, but he wasn't exactly embraced either. And the point is that this made stability even harder. So the family waited, and they did all the proper paperwork, interviews, the applications, and eventually Father Bowden's sister, who lived in America, was able to sponsor them, and the Izaks started immigrating. So when Irene was only 5 years old, the family hopped aboard a U.S. military transport ship, which was named the Marine Jumper. And they had a 10-day journey, and due to conditions and seasickness, it was a long-ass 10 days. However, the always curious Irene treated her time on the boat like it was an adventure.
She really did. She would like play games and stuff. She seems like such a good-natured kid. Like she just kind of went with the flow.
Yeah, I got the impression that like even at the age of 5, she was not only adaptable to new situations, but she was just resilient, I guess is the best word.
Well, not only was she super sweet, but she was freaking adorable. And in a testimony to her beauty, she had been graced with the nickname of Lialia, which means doll in Ukrainian.
Ooh.
So on April 18th, 1948, the Izak family arrived in America as refugees with almost nothing. The book talks about how Irene's older sister Luba, who at the time was 12 years old, said that as the ship was pulling into New York City, she, for the first time in her life, 12 years, she felt the feeling of being safe. So when the family arrived in America, they were in awe. Like in the North Country Murder book, it talks about Irene's sisters just being completely awestruck by the lights of the city when their boat pulled into the dock. And it also talks about the girls being so astonished at all the food in America. So nothing's changed.
I'm still astonished.
There were street vendors with food, and the food was just sitting out, which is not something when they're starving. That's not something they'd ever seen.
Right.
And Bowden and Maria, they always did their best, of course, to ensure their children were fed. But after everything they had been through, lack of food and going maybe hungry for the night was sadly a normal way of life. So once the family arrived in New York, it would take a few years for the family to really get settled, long term. Reverend Bowden was transferred around a lot, and I think that had a lot to do with kind of helping other Ukrainian immigrants. So he would go to different towns and areas to help them get set up with a church and also kind of helping to spread the word of Catholicism.
Yeah.
The family spent time in Colchester, Connecticut, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and Brooklyn, New York. And it was in Brooklyn that the Izak family was finally complete with the birth of their son, Nicholas. In March of 1952, so just shy of 4 years from when they arrived in America, the Izak family settled in Scranton, Pennsylvania.
Oh, home of the office.
And they really chose this area because Bowden had the opportunity to be the reverend at St. Vladimir's Ukrainian Catholic Church. And this would go on to be his congregation for the next 27 years.
Yeah, he was very revered in that community.
Yes, they loved him.
Mm-hmm.
So before we get to Irene's life in Scranton, I do want to talk a little bit about those early years after the family arrived in America and how Irene and her siblings adapted to their new life here. And honestly, they absolutely thrived. All the kids thrived.
Yeah.
From everything we know, they embraced their new home with so much excitement. They picked up the English language really quickly, which is so freaking impressive.
It's the hardest language that you can learn, from what I understand.
You and I have been speaking it for almost 40 years, and we're still struggling. All the kids did really well in school, and Irene especially loved learning. And keep this in your brain because maybe we are foreshadowing Irene's later career path.
It's true.
So Irene watched her older siblings going to school and reading books, and she wanted to keep up with them, and it actually sounds like she did. She was a very bright little girl, and there's a line in a book that says whenever Irene earned a little bit of pocket money or someone gave her some, she would immediately go spend that money and buy Nancy Drew books.
Yeah, you too.
Exactly. Same girl, same. But the Izak children didn't just do well academically. It seems like they were just really good kids. Their parents, Reverend Bowden and Maria, they seemed a little strict from the outside, but as I was reading the book, it really just seems like they were really incredibly devoted parents who did expect a lot from their children, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
I don't either.
As immigrants starting over to a new country, Bowden and Maria, they taught their kids that their behavior reflected not only on the Izak family, but also on their culture and the country they came from.
Yeah, and honestly, that is an incredible life lesson that I wish we could ingrain in the next generation, immigrant or not. Follow the rules, work hard, and treat people with kindness and respect. It's really not that hard.
That was the number one thing I got in the Izak family. And of course, religion was also a huge part of life in the Izak household, which makes sense considering these kids were what we would call PKs or preacher's kids.
Mm-hmm.
So church activities were expected, daily prayers were happening in the home, and attending mass was a non-negotiable. But while Bowden and Maria had high expectations for their kids, it was also so important that they wanted them to enjoy their life in America. They wanted them to be kids. So when the family lived in Philly, they apparently lived like right across the street from a movie theater, and the kids were obsessed with it. They would go to every movie they could as many times as they could. And one movie they especially loved was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And the sisters would sing the songs together, which I love this detail because it makes them feel so relatable. Because, I mean, even now in 2026, who hasn't belted out a Disney song at some point? Like,
true.
Be Our Guest, Let It Go, Part of Your
Yep.
World. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, and think about the time period. Like movie theaters were all the rage back then. That's what everybody was doing. And I can just imagine that these girls, when a theater came to town like this, what a great way to spend a Friday night.
Oh my God, and they lived like right across the street from it. They could
Right.
go all the time. That's awesome.
Exactly.
So, as I mentioned, the family eventually settled in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and that's where Irene began attending Marywood Seminary. Marywood was a Catholic all-girls school run by the Sisters, Servants of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Side note, I'm not Catholic, so forgive me if I'm saying any of this wrong.
You're not. I'm fact checking you as we go.
Okay, good. Irene attended Marywood for her secondary education and would later continue there for college as well. And today it's known as Marywood University and it's co-ed, but at the time it was like all girls for both college and secondary schools.
Yeah, fun fact. That's where my ex went. That's her alma mater.
That's crazy. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well, we will come back to Irene's college years in a little bit, but during her teenage years, Irene continued to thrive. She did so well in her classes, and she quickly won over both classmates and teachers with her cheerful personality. And one thing becomes clear very quickly when you read about Irene. People were just drawn to her. She had this warm, bubbly personality that made it really easy for her to make friends like wherever she went. Which is fantastic considering how much moving around she's done. That can be so hard.
Yeah, so I guess it's hard, but I've always been in one place my whole life, but I know kids who have transferred from school to school to school, and I couldn't even imagine trying to make new friends all the time. Like military families too go through this.
Yeah, I can't imagine, but for Irene, it seems like it was kind of effortless. She's often been described as a little burst of sunshine in the lives of the people who knew her. And I can relate to this too. Irene was also known to be a bit of a chatterbox, but in the best way possible.
Oh, yes. That's what we say about you too.
It seems like energy and enthusiasm were just part of what made people love being around her. And I think the description I loved reading most about Irene was when they said how her laugh was contagious.
They're the kind of people that when they enter a room, they just make everybody feels more relaxed. You're off edge. They're good people to have in your corner.
Yes. Well, as Irene grew older, she also began embracing more of the American youth culture than some of her older siblings. For example, Irene loved rock and roll, and she especially loved Elvis Presley.
Who doesn't love the king? Come on.
He's fine.
Oh, man.
Well, just a few years later, another musical group would completely capture Irene's attention. You may have heard of them. It's a little band, The Beatles. Does that ring a bell?
No, who are they? Never heard of them. No.
So, while some of Irene's older siblings were described as more reserved, Irene and her little brother Nicholas, they absolutely loved The Beatles. The two of them would put it on the radio and they would just dance together and sing along.
That's awesome. I can picture it.
I know, me too. I think it's so sweet. And in another small moment that just kind of shows the generational shift happening at the time, Irene was also the first girl in the family to wear pants and jeans.
Whoa.
And that doesn't sound particularly rebellious today, but at the time it was a little unconventional.
Yeah. That's the thing. Remember the time period we're talking about.
Exactly. Pants and jeans especially really didn't become everyday wear for women until the 60s and 70s. So this was kind of new. So within her family, Irene may have seemed just a little bit rebellious, but I mean, compared to many other teenagers of the era, because remember, this was the time of counterculture and free love, and a lot of young people were pushing back against traditional norms. So compared to all of that, Irene was still considered very straight-laced.
Yeah, and I think part of that comes from the environment that she grew up in. Like Marywood was a structured Catholic school, and it probably created something of a sheltered environment for the young women who attended there. So it makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. Irene and her siblings seem to have grown up somewhat protected from the harsher realities of the world, which is wild considering what they went through at the beginning of their lives.
Yeah.
But it was like
chaos.
once they got to America, it seemed like they were a little bit more protected. And I don't mean that in a negative way. If anything, it seems like Irene simply trusted people easily. She believed in the good of other people, and she approached the world with an open heart. And as we seem to say more and more on this podcast, there are some people in the world who don't deserve that kind of trust.
We see it every week, almost. So let's talk a little bit about Irene's college years and the post-undergrad life. And again, Irene stayed at Marywood for her degree, and I really haven't mentioned one of Irene's greatest love, and that was languages. So according to her friends, Irene was fluent in 6 languages. 6! I can't. I struggle with one, literally. So, and the language that she loved most? French. Ellie's favorite too. That's hers. So Irene was enthralled by not only the language, but anything Parisian. So when Irene graduated from Marywood in 1963, she left Scranton for Binghamton, New York, where she accepted a position as a French teacher at Binghamton North High School. And although Irene ultimately wouldn't stay at Binghamton for long, the impression she left on students was massive. Like, I got the feeling that Irene was one of those teachers, like a breath of fresh air to these high school kids. And by that, I mean, she was young, she was excited, she was this hungry new teacher. And of course, I wasn't there, but it's like there are some old school teachers who are like, I'm the teacher, you're the student, I call the shots, you follow blindly. Whereas I felt like Irene was different. Like she was more of a friend and teacher to these kids. Like she was one of those teachers who you remember your whole life, not only because of how great they were, but for how much they believed in you. Like I have teachers like that I can recall to this day.
Oh, definitely. And I definitely feel that about Irene. Like she was really a breath of fresh air. By all accounts, Irene enjoyed her teaching position, but she wasn't one to stay still for long. And that summer, so that would have been the summer of 1964, Irene had the opportunity to study at the Sorbonne in France.
Oh, talk about a freaking dream come true.
Right? Well, again, unfortunately, we don't have a ton of information about her time there, but I have no doubt that Irene made the most of every second and fully embraced the Parisian lifestyle.
Oh, 100%.
So after studying in France, Irene returned for another year teaching at Binghamton. But then in 1966, she took another high school teaching position in Rochester, New York. And it's mentioned in the book that around this time, Irene's roommates noticed a little bit of a change in their friend, like nothing major at first, but as the school year went on, Irene seemed a little bit down, maybe even a little bit distant. Her friends worried about her, but Irene was a very private person and just wasn't up for discussing what was on her mind. And we do know that there were several things that Irene was dealing with. We know she was working a full-time job as a teacher. And during this time, Irene was also saving up in hopes of getting her master's degree, which was, and still is, I think we all know, incredibly expensive.
Yes.
And I think that was really discouraging for Irene, and I can see why. It's so damn frustrating when finances is what's standing in the way of something you want so badly.
I know.
Like Irene, who is so smart and so talented, and not only the French language, but others. It's like she's got everything except for the damn money. And that just sucks. I think another reason why she might have been a little bit down or acting, not as bubbly as normal. I kind of wonder if after studying in France, if she was just really bummed about being back in her normal kind of everyday mundane life. Like,
I could see that.
It's almost like when you come home from vacation and you're like, well, that's a bummer. It's over. I've been looking forward to it. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Another thing that Irene was struggling with was her love life. Been there. We don't have a ton of information on the ex-boyfriends, but I believe it was during this period that Irene was dealing with a breakup. And unfortunately, things didn't work out with this boy, and Irene took it hard. And I don't know this for sure, but this may have been one, if not the first, of like Irene's serious relationships.
Yeah, and I think we can all agree that there are certain people and certain relationships in your life that when they end, I mean, it's almost like you're left with this permanent scar.
And it will heal a little bit, but yeah, the scar is always going to be there to
Yeah.
remind you of it.
Yeah.
Well, at the end of the 1967 school year, Irene was ready for new adventures, and that adventure led her to Laval University in Quebec City to pursue her master's degree. It was here that Irene found her happy place. In letters written by Irene to friends, she would talk about Quebec City with so much excitement. She felt the city gave her freedom. She finally had the independence that she craved. She immersed herself in the culture, and she just knew this is where she belonged. And it seems it was at this point in her life in Quebec City where Irene really came into her own.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing we haven't really touched on yet is Irene's romantic life. So Irene not only fell in love with Quebec City, but she found love in the city as well. However, much like the prior relationship, there's very little information about this relationship, but you can definitely feel reading the book that Irene fell hard for this man.
Yeah, and I think this might have added to Irene's rose-colored view of Quebec City. Like, this is just one more thing to love about this place, is the way I took it.
Definitely. Yeah, I think so too. Well, unfortunately, Irene's perfect world would soon come crashing down. Seemingly out of nowhere, this young man she had fallen head over heels with, he broke her heart. And this one really hurts because apparently, shortly after the breakup, he began dating someone else, and that relationship got serious very quickly. And Irene was just completely shattered.
Well, yeah, that's with good reason. I mean, that's hard.
It's so hard. In a letter to a friend, she wrote that the breakup made her feel like not existing. And
Oh, that's sad.
who hasn't been there? Reading that line
Yeah.
stuck with me because it just felt so real. We've all felt that.
Yeah, and I mean, from what we can tell, it seems like the breakup may have caused Irene to fall into a bit of a slump. Like, gone was the happy and bubbly girl with the big smile and that contagious laugh you were talking about. And I wasn't there, so I don't want to say that she was depressed, but I would completely understand if she was. Like, breakups are really hard. And Irene felt that she could not be in Quebec City anymore. Being in close proximity to her ex-boyfriend and maybe like the fear of running into him again, like she couldn't take it. So Irene soon made the difficult decision to move back to Scranton to live with her parents. And again, she probably felt like one step forward, 3 steps back.
When I was reading this, I could feel her pain because I went through the same situation. I graduated college, I moved to Philly with a boy, and when he broke my heart, I moved home.
Who broke your heart? Well, let me add him.
I'll give you his name and number. It does seem like Irene regretted her decision as soon as she got home. She felt like she had lost her independence and freedom, and I feel like she was having a hard time with the fact that she was 25 and not married or engaged.
If you ask today, 25 is like you're just getting started.
Yeah, but you can definitely see that pressure being there in 1968.
Absolutely. Different standards back then.
Absolutely. I feel like if you're unmarried at 25 in 1968, it's like you're considered an old maid.
Yeah, why even try at that point?
Right. Well, Irene was only home in Scranton for a few days before a friend convinced her to head out to Cleveland, Ohio. And Irene had family out there, including a cousin who she was very close with. Her relatives were absolutely thrilled to have her, and I think that they were really hoping she would kind of get out there, really enjoy it, she would get a job, and then she would stay. But Irene, in her mind, she had no plans to be there long. And actually, not long after she arrived in Cleveland, Irene got a phone call. And it was a friend of hers who had recently gotten a teaching position in Quebec City. And the friend explained that the school was still looking to hire one more person. They were going to teach English. Now, when this friend called Irene to tell her about the job, their entire conversation was in French. So her family was unable to understand what exactly she had been saying. But when Irene hung up the phone, her relatives knew something big had happened. And I feel like this moment was the start of Irene getting her groove back, so to speak.
Like Stella.
Exactly. And it was like if she got this job, she would be back in her happy place and just something to finally look forward to.
Right. A light at the end of the tunnel.
Yes. And Irene excitedly told her relatives the news about this open position. This next part is a little bit unclear to me. I'm not sure if Irene had to go there for the interview or if she could have done the interview over the phone, but she drove there to do it in person because she wanted them to know
Mhm.
she was serious about the position and would literally do whatever it took for this job offer.
Right. That speaks to her character.
Yes. I kind of almost feel like it was, she maybe could have done it on the phone, but she was like, oh, hell no, I'm going to be there.
I'm going.
Monday.
Good
Yeah,
for her.
exactly. Well, her relatives pleaded with her to stay in Cleveland just a little bit longer, but Irene could not be deterred from chasing her dreams. Unfortunately, though, she ended up in a nightmare.
Yeah, and I'm not sure we're ever going to exactly know the next part of Irene's story because only 2 people know, and only one of those people lived to tell his side of the story. Another little foreshadowing moment there.
Yeah.
So it was sometime around noon on Sunday, June 9th, 1968. And Irene was thanking her uncle and cousins for putting gas in the VW Bug, washing it, and loading it up with her suitcases and other belongings. Like, they did her a huge solid with this. And her plan was to drive from Cleveland to Rochester to visit her old roommate, Virginia, and then drive a bit further to Syracuse before spending the night at the home of another friend and former roommate. And then she would wake up early the next morning for the last leg of the journey, which would be Syracuse to Quebec City. So as Irene waved goodbye to her loved ones in Cleveland, I have to imagine there was the excitement about returning to Quebec City, but also, like we just talked about, some of this nervousness about the upcoming interview, maybe even butterflies in her stomach, like imagining what her life would look like in Canada. And I'm not entirely sure about the route that Irene took, but Google Maps today shows that Cleveland to Rochester is like 3.5, 4 hours. So I'm guessing that she probably stopped to pee, get some snacks, like get gas along the way, because she doesn't arrive at Virginia's house in Rochester until 9 p.m. that evening. So what she was doing in between those hours, I don't know. And again, we don't know what the highways were like back then.
Yeah.
So regardless, she got there late at night. And it seems that Irene was antsy to get back on the road because she only stayed about an hour. And Virginia was like, stay here, stay the night. And Irene declined. And as I mentioned earlier, the next destination on Irene's itinerary was Syracuse, New York, to spend the night at her friend Maxine's house. However, after Irene left Virginia's home, she phoned Maxine from a payphone, letting her know that there was a change of plans. She would not be visiting and she would not be spending the night. Because not only did Irene enjoy driving at night, but she knew she could make better time there. She wanted to get there. And Maxine was obviously bummed, but she wished her friend good luck with the interview and to be safe on the road. So Irene was driving north on Interstate 81, and we know that she made a stop at a rest area just a few miles north of Waterton, New York. And this part is pretty insane, but apparently while Irene was at this rest stop, she made a phone call from a payphone. And to this day, we have no idea who was on the other end of that phone call. Like, it's unclear if police knew who she called or if the call was just never able to be traced. But I wondered if she was maybe calling someone to ask to stay the night. Because remember, she was supposed to stay in Syracuse with Maxine and declined. So I wonder if she was like, "That I regret that. I should have stayed somewhere. I'm tired."
Yeah, or was she calling someone? Because what is she going to do? Sleep in her car or just go straight to
Exactly.
the interview? I don't know.
Exactly. So regardless, when she had finished that call, Irene got back on the road. And just a few minutes later, she drove past a dark blue sedan. And just a moment or two after that, she saw red and blue flashing lights in her rearview mirror and realized that this was an unmarked police car. And while this in itself doesn't seem like a big deal, like, so what? She was speeding or something and is going to get a ticket. Who cares? But it turns out to be a catalyst for everything else that you're about to hear in this story.
Yeah. So according to police records, it was 1:50 a.m., so 10 minutes of 2, when New York State Trooper David Hennigan radioed into headquarters that he was pulling a car over. And he gave a description and license plate number that matched Irene's VW. And with that, he parked his car, he put on his hat, and he stepped out onto the road. Now, as Trooper Hennigan walked along the shoulder of the road towards Irene's car, I wasn't there, obviously. I'm not exactly sure what was going through his mind, but for any police officer approaching a stopped vehicle, especially at night, there has to be at least a little bit of hesitation, like maybe even a small twinge of fear.
Oh, that's absolutely true, especially nowadays. Like, officers are never really 100% sure what they're walking into. Like, someone could be hiding in the car. There could be a weapon in the car, or the guy, girl, whoever could just be a dangerous person.
And actually, this recently happened where a police officer was shot and killed at a routine traffic stop.
That's why we have tint, like, I know we're talking about the 60s, but that's why we have window tint laws today, because police need to be able to see inside your window.
Right. And I have to imagine Irene may have been feeling something very similar in that moment, because as the trooper stepped out of his unmarked car and began walking towards her driver's side window, Irene had no way of knowing who this man really was or what his intentions might be. So both of them are approaching this moment of uncertainty. But as we'll see, it seems like only one of these two people actually had a reason to be afraid. According to Hennigan's initial statement, when he got up to Irene's driver's side window, he told her she was speeding and issued her a warning. He would go on to claim that the entire interaction lasted only minutes, but it was enough to leave Irene shaken to her core. At 2:09 a.m., so just a few minutes later, she would pull up to a toll booth, and the toll taker was a gentleman named Clifford F. Putnam, who just happened to be a retired Watertown police officer. And Putnam would later recall that Irene was scared, and I mean terrified scared. She had pointed to an unmarked police car, and she and Putnam watched as the car headed across the bridge, like went through the toll and headed across the bridge. And it was at this point that Irene asked Putnam, why would an officer pull a car over in the middle of the night for no reason?
Yeah, and in my opinion, this is the spot in the story where we can cue the crow. Because Putnam could tell that Irene was spooked about something, and it took a moment for her to collect herself and light a cigarette before she drove away. And this would be Irene's last interaction with anyone except the killer.
So we know Irene made it through the toll and she crossed the bridge to Wellesley Island. And I want to explain this road she was on a little bit. Irene was only about 5 miles from the Canadian border, and this was like a 2-lane road, and there's woods on either side, or at least a lot of trees, heavy forested area. This road actually borders the DeWolf Point State Park.
It's pretty.
Yes, it is. It's beautiful. But 4 miles after the toll booth, so we're 1 mile from the Canadian border, Irene's car was found parked at this small little pull-off area.
Yeah, and it was described as right near the entrance to DeWolf State Park, so like right where you enter the park.
This stretch of road is pitch black on this cloudy, moonless night, and it's a deserted and lonely place. And one police officer would later refer to this exact spot as the loneliest place on earth. Which, even saying that now, and I've been through this book for the last month and everything, I still get like a chill.
Yeah, it's ominous. If you look at, even looking at it on Google Maps in the daytime, it's like, wow, I could see how something could happen out here.
Yes. Well, we don't know why Irene stopped in this isolated spot, and it sounds like this was basically in the middle of the woods at sort of the top of a steep embankment. And her VW was found to be in good working order. There was plenty of gas in the car, and it would be a silly spot to like pull over and just go to the bathroom, because Irene knew that there were bathrooms at customs.
Right.
So, like, why would she pull over, or what or who made her pull over? We don't know. However, we do know that when her vehicle was found, it was running, the headlights were on, and the driver's side door was just open.
Yes, it was.
Now, additionally, the wheels of the VW were turned towards the road, like she was planning to pull right back on the road. And her window was cracked about 4 inches or so.
Oh, like when you roll your window down to talk to a police officer?
Yeah, interesting. Well, can you guess who happened to find Irene's car? Trooper Hennigan. And can you guess who would happen upon Irene's body just a few moments later? Also, Trooper Hennigan. According to police reports, at 2:35 a.m., Trooper Hennigan radioed in the following information. He was driving along the stretch of road when he saw the VW of the young woman he had pulled over only moments ago. When he approached, he noticed the body of a suspected homicide victim at the bottom of a steep embankment, and he mentioned to the dispatcher that the body could possibly be female.
Yes, and I want to stop here and basically explain what police think happened in this situation. So, for some reason, Irene pulled over. We believe Irene was dragged out of her car because there were signs of a struggle, including the fact that her glasses were found on the ground toward the rear of her vehicle. And because of where the glasses were and because of the bruising on Irene's face, investigators believe that Irene's killer may have struck her, and struck her hard enough to not only cause bruises, but also causing her glasses to fly off.
Mm-hmm.
And it was then that the killer dragged Irene to the edge of that pull-off area and tossed her petite, 103-pound frame over the guardrail, where she would have fallen down this embankment and landed at the bottom amongst all of these weeds and bushes and shrubs. And we have evidence of this because Irene's clothing had some sort of filmy substance on it, which was also found on the guardrail. And I don't know what this substance was, but I do know that it only means she could have gotten it by if that body came in contact with the guardrail.
Apparently you couldn't see it. The naked eye couldn't see it, but when they were doing an autopsy, I don't know if they used a UV light or something, but they could see whatever this kind of film was.
Interesting. Yeah, I'd be curious to know what this actually was, this substance. But the killer had then followed Irene down this embankment and proceeded to use rocks to violently strike Irene over and over and over again. And that was determined because, according to the Scranton Tribune from June 13th, 1968, investigators found multiple blood-spattered rocks at the scene ranging from 6 to 18 inches in diameter. And all of them were sent to the state's Identification Bureau for analysis to determine which, if any, was the murder weapon. And picking up a new rock each time was believed to be a calculated move so the killer didn't get any blood or other biological material on his hands, face, or body. And if that's truly the reason, it's an interesting one, because I'm not sure how many random people are out there would worry about that unless, I don't know, you were wearing a uniform or maybe something else that you didn't want that people would see you that you might not have a chance to clean up. Don't know.
Maybe.
And additionally, a special investigation team was able to lift a set of fingerprints from Irene's Volkswagen, but those prints were never matched to any known individual.
Well, shortly after Hennigan called in the body, several other officers show up. And there are a few I want to mention specifically because we're going to refer to them throughout. So we have investigator Raymond Pollitt. And let me just say, this man never let Irene's case go. He kept a picture of her in his car. He used to have someone else drive him out to this chunk of the woods at night to spend the night there just to see if anybody, like the killer, would come along to check on the area.
We say this all the freaking time. Those are the cops you want fighting for justice.
He was hardcore. And we also have investigator Charles Donahue, and we have Trooper David Fleming. So Trooper Fleming and his partner arrived first, and Fleming went and sent his partner to set up a road stop, and Fleming began trying to figure out what was going on. And remember, this is a heavily wooded area, so he calls out because he can't see Hennigan, so he calls out and he gets a response from Hennigan, who then emerged from the woods. And he explains that he found the body of a female and she was deceased, clearly the victim of a brutal homicide. And as he's talking, Fleming notices that there's blood on Hennigan's uniform. But Hennigan quickly explains that the blood got on his shirt when he checked for a pulse, which, immediately red flags are flying for Fleming because he knew that Hennigan never should have touched the victim's body.
Yeah, that's police 101. You can literally check if they have a pulse by taking 2 fingers and doing this.
Exactly. So as the investigators begin to show up, Fleming decides to drive back to the toll booth where we know that Clifford Putnam is working. So Trooper Fleming asked Putnam if he had seen a young woman drive through and if he had seen any suspicious vehicles, the usual questions. So
yeah.
Putnam tells him about Irene, and he tells Fleming about the state trooper who had, quote, scared the hell out of her, end quote. So more red flags are going up for Fleming, not only because of what Putnam said, but more about what Hennigan didn't say. Just moments before, when Hennigan and Fleming are at the crime scene, Hennigan never once mentioned to Fleming that they were standing over the body of a woman he had pulled over barely 30 minutes prior.
Right, and that is super important in my eyes. You would think that would have come up. But stepping back, I quickly want to go over just some of the things that investigators did while at the crime scene. So there weren't many homes or buildings that were kind of in direct sight of where Irene was killed or where she was found, but there were several cottages in and around the area. And troopers went around, they knocked on doors, and I think they only talked to 2 people. And all those people, they had nothing to say. They had no information to offer. So officers also brought in scent dogs, but they were unable to pick up a trail. And meanwhile, you have another set of investigators who are tasked with breaking the unenviable news to Irene's family.
Oh, this part of the book was so tough. So that morning, over 2 hours away in Scranton, Pennsylvania, Reverend Bowden and Maria, they both woke up with this terrible feeling that something was not right. And more specifically, they felt the uneasiness was surrounding Irene. So they had gotten up and gone straight to their church to pray for her safety. And we hear this so much where a mother is like, I knew my child was no longer alive.
It's so scary.
It's so scary.
Yeah, and I imagine that's a feeling that only a parent can have.
Yes. So back in Binghamton, New York, where Irene's sister Luba and her brother-in-law Steve lived, investigators were knocking on their door to deliver the devastating news that their sweet Lealio had been murdered. Irene's brother-in-law Steve was given the absolutely unenviable task of identifying Irene's body. And upon seeing it, Steve confirmed it was in fact Irene. He would tell the author of this North Country murder book, quote, I saw that face when it was alive, and I saw that face when it looked scared. The look on her face was a really frightened look. Her face was cleaned up, but you could still see where the bruising was, on her face and on her head. There was no mistake. Her face was beat up. It was beat up. There was no doubt who she was. No doubt, end quote.
I pray I'm never put in that situation because I feel like this is a sight that I would never be able to get out of my head.
I know, and I feel so bad for the brother-in-law. Well, later that day, Reverend Bowden and a mortician made the journey from Scranton to the Watertown Mercy Hospital morgue where Irene's body was held. And I am putting it out there once again that no one has ever been convicted of this crime. And I'm then going to follow it up with this appallingly cruel bit of information. After collecting his 25-year-old daughter's bruised and battered body, the Reverend had one simple request: to speak to the trooper who had found Irene's body. And in a pathetic and disgracefully cowardly move, Hennigan refused to meet with the heartbroken father of a murder victim. And in my humble opinion, it takes a very small man to deny a grieving father that simple request.
I have never, ever heard of a situation like this happening where someone in law enforcement won't give information to a grieving family member if they ask. And in my experience, officers will always help if they can. So it speaks volumes about Hennigan's character and his possible guilt, in my opinion.
So, because this crime is technically unsolved, we do need to discuss all the potential suspects.
I feel like we did already, but proceed.
I agree that we have one very good suspect, but again, no one has been arrested or charged. Also, we are going to go through these suspects. They are not in chronological order, but we'll give dates when we can.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to start out with a theory rather than a specific person. Police wondered if Irene could have either A, picked up a hitchhiker, or B, stopped to help someone in distress. And I didn't personally know Irene, but regarding the hitchhiker, even I can be like, next. That just seems ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, I know it was the time for hitchhikers, but I think Irene was not that kind of person.
She's definitely not. And her friends and family vehemently agreed. She would never pick up a hitchhiker. But the second kind of theory, what about helping someone? Her family agreed that Irene was always willing to help someone in need. However, they didn't think she would put herself in danger by pulling over, especially there in the dark in the middle of the night.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like if she did help, it probably would have been more along the lines of her getting to a phone and calling the police to report a disabled vehicle.
Right.
So I don't think that either one of those theories are super strong.
I do not either. And if, like us, you don't believe those theories hold water, perhaps you'll think that 26-year-old Albert Sinobert is to blame. So Sinobert hailed from Ontario, Canada, and he had a criminal record pretty much a mile long. And this included time in prison. And get this, so at the time of Irene's murder, Sinobert was a fugitive. He had escaped from a prison in Kingston, Ontario. He had been picked up due to violating the terms of his parole. And when he was brought in, that's when he asked to speak to homicide detectives, and he not only confessed, but also signed his written statement. And this confession was vague, but he must have been convincing enough because New York detectives actually drove up to the prison in Canada where he was being held to question him about Irene's murder. Unfortunately, when they started pressing him for more information, it became clear it was a false confession, like he was just making this up based on information he was reading in articles.
Yeah, I just don't understand why anyone would do that, but whatever.
I don't either. It's a clout thing, I think.
Yeah. Well, the next suspect I need to mention is Arthur Shawcross, as in
Ooh.
the Genesee River killer, Arthur Shawcross.
Yes, he was an absolute monster.
Oh my God, we could spend a whole episode discussing his horrific crimes. Or, no, more importantly, we could spend a whole episode talking about the victims who lost their lives.
Exactly.
Yes, at the hands of this predator. Shawcross, funny enough, was actually on my list for the short sentences block back in February.
He would have been a good one.
He would have been, because after raping and killing 2 children, a 10-year-old boy and an 8-year-old girl, he was sent to prison and released after 14 years.
It's like nothing.
It's disgusting. And then when he got out from there, he would go on to murder at least 12 vulnerable women in the Rochester area. At least 12. We think there's
that we know of
so many more. He would strangle his victims and dump their bodies in secluded locations along the Genesee River. And given his history of brutality and his ties to the region, authorities eventually questioned whether Shawcross could somehow be linked to Irene's murder. They were eventually able to rule him out.
Yeah, they were.
I don't know that we can ever cover him. He's a really, really bad one.
Yeah, and like why? Don't give him any credit. I mean, he's a pig.
I know. This is kind of wild. Even Ted Bundy was kind of considered for a brief time. Isn't that crazy?
I think every crime in the country around that time, once Ted's name started surfacing.
Exactly. But it was determined he was in Colorado at the time of Irene's murder. Another infamous serial killer who was considered was John Norman Collins. He mainly operated in Michigan, but he had actually been in the Wellesley Island area just like 24 hours before Irene was there.
Oh, wow.
But
I actually didn't know that.
I know, I didn't either, but they were able to rule him out. Like he had been there and gone 24 hours prior.
Yeah.
There were a few other suspects here and there, but each one was eventually ruled out for one reason or another. So let's go back to Trooper Hennigan. The information that I'm going to share with you comes straight from the book that I've referenced throughout, The North Country Murder of Irene Izak. And again, to be clear, no one has ever been charged for Irene's murder, and all parties are innocent until proven guilty.
Cover up. Excuse me. Pardon me.
Do you have a catch in your throat? You okay?
I think it worked itself out.
Good. So there's several things that don't quite add up. Like, we already know Hennigan refused to meet with Irene's family. And actually, he was given the opportunity on multiple occasions throughout the years to speak with Reverend Bowden. There were at least 2 more times that Bowden drove up there to try to speak to him.
Yes.
We also know that according to Clifford, the toll booth guy, Irene was very shaken up. So let's go back to that for a minute. Clifford Putnam told investigators that Irene asked him for a light to light her cigarette. Well, he pulled his lighter out, and as Irene pulled her cigarette to light it, she was visibly shaking.
Yeah, and something to note that stood out to me is that investigators later discovered that Irene had matches in her purse. So why'd she ask for a light? I mean, she was probably just not in her right mind because of how scared she just was.
Yeah, but that did stand out, and that stood out to investigators too. Now, I wasn't really quite sure where to put this part in my research, but the route that Hennigan took between pulling Irene over and then finding her body, it wasn't completely ridiculous that he would be on this road, but it did make investigators scratch their heads, as this was not the normal patrol route for the shift that he was working.
It's true. Well, and I'm going to walk us through this next part because before I even read the police report, when I saw in the story that she was driving a VW and I tell you what Hennigan clocked her at, I was like, no effing way. So this jumped out immediately. So when Hennigan pulled Irene over, he told her that she was going 75 miles per hour. And so to note, this would have been, we looked at the old highway speeds, this would have been 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. Mm-hmm. And anyone who has ever driven or ridden in a VW Bug knows that you can push that damn pedal through the floor and you're not hitting 75. Like, in fact, investigators would later do a test, and no matter how hard they pushed that car, they could not get that thing anywhere close to 75 miles per hour. It topped out at like 62, which means she was not speeding, and she was actually going under the speed limit of 65.
Exactly. So she was right.
That make sense.
She was right to ask Putnam, like, why did he pull me over? I didn't do anything wrong.
I can't speed.
Well, following up on that, in a second interview, like years later, Hennigan would go on to change his story. He's like, oh my God, no. I didn't pull over for speeding. He pulled her over because it was an unfamiliar car and there had been burglaries in the area.
Not how the law works.
Sure, Jan. And by the way, it was also at this point that Hennigan would change the time and the area of where he pulled her over from the story that he initially reported into headquarters.
Mm-hmm.
So this means that now the location of the original stop has changed. The time of the original stop has changed. And the reason for the initial stop has changed.
A lot of changes.
But it's fine. I'm sure he is a law-abiding, trustworthy lawman, clearly.
Mm-hmm.
And on that note, when Hennigan was still saying that she was speeding, he claimed that he only gave her a warning. He didn't give her a ticket for the speeding. And the reason this is notable is because apparently Hennigan loved writing tickets. Like, this douche got off on it.
Yeah.
Retired New York State Trooper David Fleming is quoted several times throughout the Murder in North Country book. He was actually working the night of Irene's murder, and he would comment that it was very out of character for Hennigan to let anyone go without a warning. Like, he even referred to Hennigan as a paper hanger.
Mm-hmm. Power hungry.
I had to look that up. I didn't know what it meant, but it just
somebody who just like writing tickets. Yeah.
Yeah. So now I want to go back to the crime scene. How in the hell did Hennigan even find Irene's body? When Hennigan took investigator Pollitt to see the body, at first Pollitt was like, what are you talking about? He didn't see anything. And he would later go on to say, quote, I had trouble seeing it at first because of all the vegetation and the fact that the upper part of the victim's body was clothed in a dark jacket. Hennigan pointed it out to me 2 or 3 times, and I had difficulty recognizing what I was looking at. End quote. So if that's the case, how did Hennigan so easily find her? Like, where did he even know where to look? If you just see this car's pulled over, how did he pick the exact spot?
I actually asked Lisa the same question on the phone, and here was her response.
The state trooper said he saw her car pulled over with the lights on, and he said it was pitch black, but that was the funny thing they said, too. How could he have possibly see her? She was down, like, over the guardrail in the ravine.
I noticed
pretty
that,
far
too.
down.
I was reading into that a little bit. I'm like, wait a minute, something doesn't add up here.
Yeah, they said there was no way. They couldn't see when they got there, the other state troopers.
Well, adding to this mystery is what Hennigan said when he radioed headquarters about finding Irene. He alerted them that he had found a body, what looks to be a victim of a homicide, possibly a female. If Irene was as hidden as everyone says, how did he know this was a female?
I'd seen on a message board about this case that someone said maybe the trooper, like, that it was because of the VW. But lest we forget, Mr. Theodore Bundy was also driving a VW Bug, so gender stereotyping a car doesn't really fit here.
Except when a middle-aged man buys a Miata, we know that's a midlife crisis car, and that fits.
Yeah. I like when they're way taller than the hood. Like, if they had the roof on, their head wouldn't fit, so they only you can only ride it with the top down.
You're like, how did you get in and out of that?
It's like clown car.
Well, continuing on with the crime scene, investigator Pollitt would explain that when you are at a crime scene, especially with a body, you want to do the least amount of damage as possible. He said, quote, you approach and leave by the same route, so when the identification people get there, you can tell them where exactly you walked so they aren't chasing, say, a hair from your head or a footprint from you, end quote. He also pointed out that this will cut down on the chance of evidence being, like, walked all over. We know that Hennigan had walked in several different areas, but he actually wasn't the only one. Apparently, the assistant medical examiner broke protocol by going near Irene's body before the forensic techs were on the scene. Which to me means like the entire crime scene at this point has been compromised.
Yeah, and we do have to take into account that investigative techniques were not what they are today. Like, investigators didn't know the things they know today, so the crime scenes were a little messier there. People barely used gloves. They were trampling all over stuff, so it was just a different time. So that does need to be pointed out. And all of this is definitely suspicious, but there is a glaring issue that might tell the entire story, in my opinion. So at the top, when you had mentioned that Trooper Hennigan had blood all over his uniform, so when Investigator Paulette was discussing this part with the author of the book that we keep referencing, the North Country Murder book, he told the author, quote, "It looked like blood spatters, small droplets of blood on his shirt and a larger spot of blood on I believe it was the right bicep area. Could have been the left bicep area. I guess a larger smear or blot of blood," end quote. So let's keep in mind that when Paulette is recalling all of this to this book author, it had been over 3 decades at this point. Like, Paulette didn't have his original notes about the case, and this is something that I have dealt with as a producer many, many times. Like, you're interviewing an investigator about, like, the case that, like, his career case, like the one he'll never forget. And no matter how many years have passed, these memories and details are seared into their brain. Like, that's how immersed in that case they became. So then when Paulette asked how that blood got on him, Hennigan would explain that while he was checking Irene's vitals, he had rolled her over and Irene's head had rested against his upper arm. So that's how the blood got on his uniform. Now, I have absolutely no medical background or training, but even I know that you shouldn't move someone around like that in these specific circumstances. Like, this is crime scene 101. So explain to me how Hennigan didn't know that, a New York State trooper. And please keep in mind that Hennigan had been a corpsman in the Army. And FYI, a corpsman is a member of a military medical unit. And as Paulette would say, quote, "That was one of the things that made my eyebrows go up," end quote.
Yeah, like you don't touch the body of someone, not only because of evidence, but what if she was still alive and like...
And her neck was broken and you're flipping her around. Get out of here. So another thing that probably raised eyebrows was that Hennigan would later give 2 other reasons for Irene's blood getting on his uniform. Needless to say, when the family learns about all of this kind of conflicting information, when they get their hands on some of the official details, they were stunned. Like, here is Lisa telling it in her own words.
He had some blood on him, and he had been in the military, and plus they're trained, New York State Police, not to pick up the bodies or move them, whatever.
Right.
At first he said that he picked her up, cradled her, and her head rolled onto his uniform and got blood on it. Then he said, "No, I was running down the hill, and I fell and I rolled onto her body." And then his third story was that he fell and flopped over her, and then her head turned. Like, he had 3 different stories. And they also said, like, when he was being interviewed, they didn't really suspect him, right? Some of the state troopers did, but when they got him back to the barracks, whatever, and were interviewing him, he was really nervous. They said it was really bizarre. Yeah. And also there was blood on his sleeves and on the front of his uniform. Like, we didn't know all those details, like all the different stories.
And that right there is one of the most damning things that you can hear about a suspect, in my opinion. Like, the truth never changes. A lie has to keep evolving to cover itself. So the fact that you have 3 different versions of why this blood is on your uniform at a murder scene is not confusion. It's him scrambling to find a story that makes sense.
Not to mention, we have several different stories about when, where, and why she was pulled over.
Exactly right. And I just want to give a little bit more detail about this blood, because you'll be interested to know that at least 4 people, including investigator Paulette, saw a, quote, "perfectly round spot about 1/4 inch in diameter," end quote, of blood on the top of the rear bumper of Hennigan's police car. And we know it was blood. And how does Paulette know this? He's an experienced investigator who's seen his share of blood to know that it was blood on Hennigan's car. But somehow the blood was gone not long after. And now, to be fair, it was raining, and it was like one of those yucky kind of cold drizzles. So sure, maybe the blood could have washed off, or maybe it was intentionally wiped off. We don't know.
We can make some guesses. Anyway.
We could.
So the same day that everything was happening, Hennigan was asked to take a lie detector test. And I don't put much stock into this. I think lie detector tests are so dumb.
Well, they measure stress, not truth.
Right.
You can beat them, too. They're easily beatable.
Yeah, especially for someone who's been a police officer for several years. But moving on. When he was asked to take the lie detector test, he only agreed after asking the district attorney if he should take it. And the DA was like, well, yeah, I would, especially if I didn't commit the crime.
Right.
So Hennigan agreed, and like this wasn't the best move because he was tired. He had worked all night. Like, I'll give him that. Like, so much is going on, and ultimately they couldn't get a read on Hennigan. But in fairness, I do want to note, though, he did take a polygraph at a later date, and he supposedly passed it. But again, shake that magic 8-ball, and we will get a different answer. Now, this is the part that really gets me. Well, first off, Trooper Hennigan just kept on working. After all of this, he was not put on leave. He was not told to take time off. He just continued working as if nothing had happened.
Well, yeah, because in his mind, nothing did happen. You know, he's going to play that off. And if he didn't, and again, if he had nothing to do with this, then it really was just another day on the job, another discovery. Just because he was involved in an investigation, if he didn't do it, why would he be bothered by it?
Well, I know that the public wasn't super pleased about this, but so one night he goes into work, and normally Hennigan would go to the Watertown station. But on this night, he had been asked to report to Troop D headquarters, which was in Oneida, New York.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So waiting there to speak with Hennigan was Paulette and also a man named Joseph Leary. And he was a lieutenant with the state police, like BCI, which is the Bureau of Crime Investigations.
Criminal investigations, yeah.
Yes. So it's late at night. Like, I do want to, because he worked overnight. So we're talking, it's a very early 1 a.m., something around that time. Yeah. So they're talking to Hennigan, and they're asking him about some of those inconsistencies within his story of what happened. They're barely 30 minutes into an interview that should have lasted 3 to 4 hours when the door to the interview room literally flies open. And guess who's standing in that doorway? Hennigan's very angry wife. Somehow, she found out that her husband was being questioned, and she was not having it. She put a stop to the interview then and there. Oh my God. And get this. Apparently, the wife told Paulette that he's picking on her husband. Which to me sounds like the wife of a man whose balls are in her purse. But what do I know?
In your opinion.
In my opinion. Well, after that one interrupted interview, Hennigan got a lawyer and was never, ever questioned again.
Yeah, there's another detail about Hennigan that I think is worth sitting with. So after retiring from the state police in the early 1980s, Hennigan became a deacon at a Catholic church in the Watertown area. A church deacon. Like, some people, including those in Irene's family, have speculated that this was his way of seeking absolution and or doing the thing that guilty people do, which is like swing that pendulum from extra evil to extra good, like become a born-again Christian. You know, you see that all the time. But in this case, a church leader, this guy becomes.
Or like how Ted Bundy worked at the suicide hotline.
Yes. And here is Lisa's take, because apparently she tried to get answers out of him too.
I wrote him letters at first I wrote him a couple letters. You know, he could have said harassment, but he didn't. He knew what he did.
It's interesting that she told him that, because apparently he wrote a letter to the writer of this book, and at the end he finished it with basically a threat, and he was like, before you move on, I would consider libel, slander, and something else. Like, he basically threatened him, but he quoted that.
Well, and we're just using the book as the source, so we are just reporters in this state. We are not breaking any information. We're just telling you what we know. Mm-hmm. So, and my thought is, if he were innocent, wouldn't an innocent person write back to Lisa and be like, I'm sorry for your loss. I wish I had answers for you. Like, He doesn't act like an innocent man. And that's what drives me nuts through this whole, I would have a totally different opinion if he would have just done things differently. Like, an innocent man doesn't need a lawyer to avoid a conversation. He doesn't need his wife to barge in and stop an interview. Mm-hmm. And guess what? David Hennigan died of a heart attack in 2009. So he took whatever he did know about the case, if anything, to his grave.
That makes me so sick, because in the end, Hennigan faced absolutely no consequences for his actions. And I'm not even talking about if he committed the homicide. I mean, even after all the other shit, giving the multiple stories about when, where, why he pulled Irene over, and being in an area he wasn't really supposed to be patrolling, and the fact that he basically broke the most simple rules when it comes to a crime scene, there was not a single repercussion, not even a slight slap on the wrist. He wasn't transferred for a little bit. He wasn't suspended. Nada. And according to the DA at the time, a spineless weenie named William J. McCluskey, my opinion, he said, quote, disciplining Hennigan would have looked bad for the troop, end quote. One could argue that murdering an innocent 25-year-old could look bad as well. But, what do I know?
Yeah, who are we?
Now get this part. So there was a TV news reporter for one of the local TV or radio stations, and he tried talking to Watertown State PD and to the DA's office, but they were incredibly tight-lipped about Irene's case, which I'm only bringing up because it was kind of a contrast to other cases that this reporter had spoken to them about. And at this point, if you aren't already angry at everything we've discussed so far, this will put you over the edge. So this news reporter, his name was Joseph Rich, he went to the crime scene, and when Irene's body had been removed, police permitted him to go down the embankment, and while he was down there, he found what was quite possibly evidence. And how it was missed by the authorities, I don't even want to begin to speculate, but Joseph Rich claims that he found a newspaper, and it was dated for either June 9th or the 10th, with blood on it. When Rich found this newspaper, he immediately took it to Troop Major Raymond Rasmussen. Rasmussen accepted the newspaper. Well, a few days later, the reporter would ask, oh, so did you figure out if that newspaper was actually evidence? And strangely enough, no one had any idea what he was talking about.
What paper?
Newspaper? Yep.
Yeah.
Well, years later, Rasmussen would claim he had no idea what anyone was talking about. He has I can't recall this newspaper. It should be noted that Rasmussen was in the camp that Hennigan was innocent.
There's definitely people that think that.
So take from that what you will. Another thing I feel like is important to add, apparently Trooper Hennigan had a nickname within the trooper world. That nickname was Heathen. And apparently he loved this stupid ass nickname. And adding to that, apparently Hennigan had quite the intense temper and, quote, quite often had tantrums, end quote. Also, there was a private investigator at one point who noted that apparently, and again, this is all alleged, that Hennigan was a domestic abuser.
Oh. No comment.
Yes, that's all coming from the book. Now get this. In the years after Irene's murder, Hennigan became very interested in the Catholic Church, as Ed said earlier. In fact, in 1975, he built a new chapel. He and his sons built a new chapel, which, in my opinion, it seems that this act of altruism may have been used to assuage one's guilt. And in the years after Irene's death, her broken-hearted father would drive to New York to beg Hennigan to speak with him. And still again, this man of the cloth refused each time.
Interesting.
And I want to mention a couple of things about where this case stands today and what the family has done to keep Irene's memory alive. Because this is not a family who was just going to accept the silence. So in late 1998, 30 years after Irene's murder, the family took the extraordinary step of having her body exhumed from St. Vladimir's Cemetery in Minooka, which is a suburb of Scranton. The renowned forensic pathologist, Dr. Michael Baden, one of the most famous in the entire country, he conducted a second autopsy. And what he found has never been part of the original investigation. There was a previously undetected cause of death. There was actually a blow to the back of Irene's neck, which changes everything about how we think about that murder weapon.
Well, and I will throw this out there as pure speculation because those fractures, which could have been a smooth rock, but looking back, it also could have been, you remember when police used to carry those the long mag lights? They were about 15 inches long. Yeah. The flashlights, that the end of those things are pretty circular and pretty heavy when you swing them because they got 4D batteries in them. So just throwing that out there as something that they speculated could have been the possible murder weapon, not rocks.
Yeah, I believe at one point somebody also suggested the use of a billy club.
Yeah. That's the same exact thing.
Is that what it is? Okay, I wasn't quite sure.
Well, no, a billy club is that thing they keep on their, it's like an L-shaped, it's a beaten stick, basically. It's to subdue people, but it was back in the 60s, that was a very common police tool.
I think they had a psychic come out at one point, and I think the psychic said the billy club.
Really? Okay.
In June of 2012, on the 44th anniversary of Irene's murder, a permanent memorial was unveiled right at the spot where she was killed on what is now County Road 191 on Wellesley Island. On the sign is this beautiful picture of Irene. Two of her nieces, Maria Black and Daria McDonald, traveled from Scranton to be there. And this local woman who had no ties to the case, her name was Karen Davis, she organized the whole thing. Karen was only 14 years old when the murder happened, and she said the North Country never forgot Irene. According to a Watertown Daily Times article from June 2012, one of Irene's former colleagues who drove all the way from Albany to attend, and I'm paraphrasing, but she couldn't believe how dark and lonely the spot must have been that night.
Yeah.
And she said she just had to have her picture taken with Irene one last time, which is so sweet.
It is sweet. Especially because she had no ties to the case.
Right. And as for the family, what did they really want out of all of this? After all the years, all the letters written, all the investigations, all the private detectives, psychics, and petitions to the governor, Lisa said it best. And here she is.
Father is a Ukrainian Catholic priest, so my aunts, my mom, and my aunt and uncle were, very, very kind people. They came from Ukraine. Just very kind, compassionate people. They weren't, vengeful, whatever. They just, such grief and just wanted to know, why? Why did you do this?
And I think that is one of the most heartbreaking and also, dignified things that I've ever heard a family say. Because they don't want vengeance. It's not about that at this point. They just want to understand. And they'll never get that. Irene was 25 years old. She was brilliant. She was warm. She was funny. She was multilingual and on the verge of greatness. Everything that she had worked for. And she was robbed of all that.
Yeah.
So we have heard that there are people in Hennigan's circle to this day who will come at people who talk about the fact that he could be a murderer. And to that I say, come at us, because we are just reporting facts that we are reading in books, in newspaper articles, in official reports. And I don't know what you expect people to think. I didn't make Hennigan change his story 3 times.
Exactly.
I didn't make him, you know what I mean? This guy made a lot of bad choices. And if in fact he was responsible for this, I just wish somebody will come forward, some piece of evidence will surface that proves it. Or on the flip side, that proves someone else was responsible. All we are doing is shedding light on this case and Irene, who is a wonderful person, and we just want people to get answers. That's it. So if you have any information about this case, literally anything at all, a tip, a sighting, any weird piece of information that you think may not even be connected but could help solve this crime, the New York State Police Cold Case Unit is still actively assigned to it, and Irene's family, they deserve answers.
We're not going to have any banter today. We're just going to close this episode, but this part was so cool to me. The New York State Police finally agreed to release some of information about the investigation, not much. But they did agree to return Irene's Marywood class ring, which she was wearing on the morning of her death. So not only did they return it, it arrived on March 3rd, 1995, but just the day prior, Lisa had learned that she was pregnant with her first child.
Isn't that wild? This story is sad, and we don't normally cover cold cases, as you guys know, but this one meant a lot to us because of the people involved, and it's not often that we get to cover stories for friends of ours. So that's why this was long. That's why there was so much backstory about Irene, because she deserved it. I thought it was so interesting about the struggles that they endured just to get to America, let alone Irene's life. And then something like this happens. It's the ultimate tragedy, and made worse by the fact that 58 years later, we still don't know what happened.
You make it through bombs and Nazis, but you don't make it through New York State.
I know. And just a simple trip on a highway. Insane. She did nothing wrong.
Nothing.
Yeah. And that says it all. So you guys, we told you what we know. Now it's up to you to decide what you think.
Until next week, we hope that you all stay safe, stay hydrated, and remember that perverts don't wear signs that say they're perverts.
They used to carry mag lights and billy clubs, though.
Yeah, sometimes they wear badges.
in your opinion.
In my opinion.
See ya.
Bye.